Let me see. Alright, it works. In this video, I'm going to talk about this phenomenon called fake news. We know about it because the media is talking about it. So the fact we are aware of it also comes by that same media who is using it. Anyway, when talk about fake news, you might think of CNN, you might think of Trump, or you might think of some of the hoaxes that came on YouTube. But by doing that, you're missing the bigger picture here. What is fake news and why are they doing it? It's very simple. Fake news is not news. Well, Rashid, you may say, of course not news, it's fake. No, you don't get what I'm saying here. Look beyond the phenomena. Okay, just found this image over here. This is a tree. These are the roots. And it's the roots that produce the core of the tree. From there you have the branches, and there you have the leaves and the fruits. Fake news is just one of the fruits of the tree. But what are the roots? The root is witchcraft. And I've spoken about this type of witchcraft before. It's suggestive witchcraft. Yes, I said it. Fake news is an expression of suggestive witchcraft. Not only fake news, because there are many news messages that are designed to suggest negative outcomes onto you. But in this video, to make it more easier for you, I'll focus on fake news because that's more easier. Okay. To explain how fake news operates, I'm going into history a bit with you. Okay, what you see here, this is an interactive website. It's called Time Maps, so you can look it up for yourself. There are more of such servers out there, but I'm just using this one because this one's more convenient. Here you can go to 30 BC. And 30 BC was when the Roman Republic turned into the Roman Empire. You can see it here, it was still growing. The Chinese Empire was already established. The Chinese Empire came around the 3rd century BC. That was shortly after the collapse of the Hellenic or the Greek Empire. So the Chinese Empire is a successor of the Greek Empire. I hope that's clear onto you. Because the Greek Empire, despite being fractured, that turned into the Roman Empire. Now, in around, let me see if I'm right here. Yes, in around 280, the world's population was some estimate between the 250 and 300 million. We can't say for sure because there were many wars. Because remember, the rulers of the world back then also were pagan rulers, and those pagan rulers, they killed a lot of people. They've always have done that throughout history. So on this map, in the Western Hemisphere, at least in our view, is the Western Hemisphere, because we tend to take Europe as the center of thought, or Jerusalem. So on the Western Hemisphere, in the Americas, you had the Mesoamerican state, which were run by the Mayans. It also had the Olmecs with their kingdom over here. But here you had one civilization in the Caribbean. You had one in the Andes Mountains over here. You had the Wa state, the Wa Empire, which later turned into Japan. Of course, you had the Chinese Empire. You have several kingdoms over here. You had the Parthian kingdom, which was far inferior in quality to the Romans, and you had the Roman Empire itself. The number one political and economic power, and also cultural power at the time, was Rome, or the Greek civilization, because the Romans, well, the Romans were Greeks that later kind of separated themselves, but were still Greeks, still used the Greek language and the Greek gods, but in a Roman fashion. The second one was the Chinese Empire, or the Han Dynasty. And, well, there was no dominant power over here because the population here was quite low. The majority of the world's population lived between the east of Italy and the west of Kyushu. Here's where most of human population lived at the time. The population in the East Roman Empire was far higher than the one in the West. And the population here, in these two centers, you had many people living. I'm not saying there were no tribes living here and there, but they were quite remote. These were very remote communities. The world's economy centered around these urban centers. And between the east of Italy and the west of Kyushu is where the most human population resided. So here's where most of the things happened, okay? Now, what does this have to do with fake news? Understand this. The pagan rulers of the world, even back then, they held the human population in bondage through fear. Why? When a human being is in a fear state, they can't think straight. It's proven scientifically and neurologically you can't think straight when you are in a fear state. Parts of your brain shut down. The parts of your brain necessary for critical thinking shuts down, so you can't think clearly when you are in a fear state. And as a spirit being, when you are in a fear state, you generate heavy toxic energy. So you emit waste energy, and demons feed off of waste energy. And the pagan rulers that rule this world, they need the human population in the negative. That's the only way demons can easily steal away human energy, especially male energy. And that's the only way the pagan rulers can maintain their control on the human race. So all these states you see here, the Roman Empire had several kingdoms within it, as well as the Chinese Empire. All these empires and kingdoms, they were run by the same people who worshipped Apollo. They all spoke Greek, which was the spoken language of the world. They knew one another because it was a small world even back then. And they kept their populations in bondage through fear. How did they do it? You need to convince the population that they're under threat, that something is coming after them, even though they don't know what that something is. As long as you can convince the population that something is after them, even if you keep it vague, you got them already. Okay? Now, I want to zoom in on this map. Let's see if that is possible. Yeah, it is possible. At least I hope. Well, no. That means I may have to do it differently. I need to go back now. Look, when, for example, you go to the Han Dynasty, let me say the Chinese Empire. Alright, I got a map of here. In the Han Dynasty, you have several kingdoms in here, which all submitted to an overlord in, I believe it was Liangwan. I may pronounce the name wrong here, but it was a Chinese town, city, where the emperor resided, and the emperor was the overlord of these kingdoms and these tribes over here. How did they succeed in maintaining this structure over here? What you see here are in Siberia. At least that's the name we gave it today. And you had nomads living in small communities here and there. They lived around lakes, because you have big lakes in Siberia, and also around near rivers, I mean. And from time to time, they would come to the urban centers for trade, as humans often tend to do. Now, the pagan rulers of ancient China, they needed to keep the population in fear. So how did they do it? They convinced through rumors, because you had those men that they hired in that spread rumors all over the place about those dangerous men on horses from the north coming to hunt them. And as a human being, you have this need for safety. We have a need for safety, a need for security, and a need to be relevant. Those are three basic human needs every human being has. So for the pagan rulers to get a hold on human population, they somehow need to offer a counterfeit solution to those three basic human needs: the need for security, the need for safety, and the need to be relevant. Now, envision this. You have around, let's say, maybe 58 million people living over here. Of course, you have some more people living here also, and in Tibet and in Southeast Asia, but let's talk about the Han jurisdiction now. You had over 58 million people living there, so they all share the same currency. There are differences in languages and customs, but there's ease over there. So people are accustomed to the ease. And then suddenly, here and there are attacks. People are kidnapped, people are killed. So what happens? People feel frightened because there are attacks happening. And then you have those men reporting all the time. You have those Huns, those men on horses in the north coming after us. So what happens now is that the human need for safety is violated. Therefore, the need for security is violated also. But then you have the need for relevance. So when that's happening all the time, people get fed up with all those attacks, or wish them were staged anyway, but they don't know. They don't know that. And then you will have a few people calling for action. So now they are provoking the need for relevance that human beings have. And once they provoke this need for relevance, many people are triggered in volunteering themselves in complying with the solution, because people want a solution for what's going on. So once they have been exhausted by their needs for safety and security being violated, and then someone comes by and provokes their need for their need for relevance or vindication, what happens? People will offer themselves for the solution. And that's how the Han jurisdiction built a military capacity to construct a big wall. But in practice, the soldiers forced locals, often farmers, to build the wall. So all the focus was on building a big wall to protect their life. Why? Because the people felt protected, because a big wall was constructed, their need for relevance was met. And because their need for relevance was met, even though it wasn't the ideal answer, it covered, it blinded them from seeing that they've been tricked, they've been hoaxed. So because they felt relevant, they felt at ease, they now thought they were safe, they were secure. Although Young, I think this was the capital, but okay. So when that happened, you had an equilibrium over here. People felt at ease because they were being protected. So this created an us feeling, an us emotion. So everyone that belongs to the us is considered safe, while everyone that's on the outside is considered a threat. Now, when you go to the Roman Empire, which over here, the same thing happened over there. You had the pagans that ran Roman administration. They convinced the people in the Mediterranean that you had those Germanic savages coming after them. And that's how they built many military camps around the Danube River and the Rhine River. In fact, Rome had 60 colonies in what they call Germany, and there were even Scandinavians that often came to Rome for trade, and even many Scandinavians that served in the Roman army. So where were those wild savages that came after their civilization? I'm not saying there were no raiders. There were no gangs going around to loot. Those existed. However, the news that was spread throughout around the Mediterranean was fake news for 90% of the time. Most of the people living in the north of Europe at the time, they wanted to be included in the Roman economy because it was stable. You had one currency and judges everywhere to deal with conflict. So it was secure, and there were no wars in Europe back then. So the Roman civilization was, in that case, a blessing for the inhabitants of Europe. Yes, there were thieves and criminals going around, but you had those everywhere in the world. So this whole idea of those barbarians in the north coming to destroy us was fake news. Now, why did the Romans spread that? Just like with the Chinese Empire. You cause the population to feel afraid, and then you offer the relief. And once you grant them the relief, they're stuck. And that is where you want them to remain. The same happened with these civilizations over here. And the pagan rulers that ran those small tribes living here and there, those nomad tribes, they did the same thing. It's one big con game that the pagan rulers are conducting on the human population. They've been doing this ever since the foundation of the world. Their ancestors did the same thing. The same they're doing today to the people of this generation. And the same they will do in future generations. It's just one and the same game. Since 200 BC, now this is 200 AD, but since 200 BC, you have this Apollonistic structure that's centered around Apollo that governs the world. Before that, it was centered around the Egyptian gods. But after the Greek Empire, after the death of Alexander of Macedonia, which he called Alexander the Great, who is Apollo, Antichrist, they centered the whole world's system around Apollo. So we live in an Apollonistic world system. And this has been in place since 200 BC. Well, actually, a bit earlier than that, but it was since 200 BC, around that area, that became established worldwide. The Chinese Empire, the Mesoamerican Empire, the Roman Empire, all these kingdoms and empires were Apollonistic. Okay, all that gets through to you. Well, I was talking about fake news. Okay, and I used this history lesson to teach you that fake news is nothing new. It's suggestive witchcraft. In fake news, you suggest a negative outcome to someone, an outcome that seems practical. You don't just suggest something that's completely out of line. You're not going to suggest, for example, that tomorrow a meteor is going to fall out of space and we're all going to die. You're not going to suggest something like that, because people would look at you and think, dude, go to a psychiatrist, you need help. But if you would suggest unto people that the economy may crash, we need to stop spending that much. And if you allow someone wearing a suit who claims to have graduated Harvard telling you this on TV, people will fall for it very quickly. It can be that the guy saying it is an actor, that he has no degree whatsoever, but the fact that alone that he appears to be a businessman and he, in that image, he suggests a bad outcome that triggers people, because people have been conditioned to worship and to venerate people wearing suits, people that have status. They've been conditioned like that. So the pagan rules of the world use their conditioning against them. Okay, so if someone would suggest, for example, the economy is going to crash very soon, people are triggered because if the economy crashes, that means their safety and security is violated, and people don't want to be violated. So let's say someone says this on TV, and then more people say it on multiple news stations, and then you have people from the alternative media saying it's fake news, this and that. Now people are going to be triggered. And here's the thing, when people from the alternative media say it's fake news and they come with other facts, people are now triggered into listening to those alternative facts. That's how you create two camps. One camp is mainstream media, one is the alternative media. And the population then will have a so-called choice between the mainstream and the alternative. The alternative goes against the mainstream, and the mainstream claims to be the legitimate one. So when people are triggered by the alternative media, they tend to give in to the alternative media. But here's the thing, that both alternative media as well as the mainstream are run by the same pagan rulers. So you're still part of the same con game, you're still being conned, but you're not aware you're being conned. The same thing they do today with mainstream media, alternative media, that has been going on since ancient times. At that time, they didn't have instant communication. So news was spread around through letters, bulletins. Bulletins are those small newspapers. That's how during those times news was spread around. And the number one device that was used, devices that were used were ships. And for example, to send a message from Rome here all the way to Egypt would take about around 12 to 14 days. From here to Olisipo, today called Lisbon, it would take around maybe 12 days. From here to here, it may take around, if you have good wind, 4 weeks or else 5 weeks. Okay? And from here to here, that would take about, if you come all the way from Rome, it would take about 2 months to go from here all the way to here. So if you would go from here to Rome and then to here, it may take around 3 months. So within 3 months, you could have gone from the Western Hemisphere all the way to the Eastern Hemisphere if you didn't have any hindrance, like hurricanes or storms on the seas. Okay? But okay, so within 3 months they could reach everyone in the world. So the pagan rulers back then, they came together, they had meetings together on how to scare the human population. And remember, the pagan rulers of the world, they are of one accord. It's one cult. It's one club. So they're all good with one another. Well, good. They're all in one line with one another. So that's how they kept the human population around 250 million, or some say 300 million. There were many kids being born, but many either died in childhood due to malnutrition or due to wars and child sacrifices. That is how it went back then in ancient times. Today, it's only a bit different because you have the biblical revelation that has manifested throughout history and that hinders much of the blood sacrifices pagans want to do. In this case, I mean the pagan rulers want to do. But it's still happening. Think about World War I, World War II. Think about the Vietnam War. Think about all those other wars are still going on. Those are blood sacrifices in mass. So by keeping the population afraid, you hinder them from traveling around. You hinder them from effectively being in contact with one another. So you keep them trapped in small locations. And that's how those states build their power and their structure. You don't want people to be traveling around freely all the time. No, you want them to be stuck somewhere. And you do that by triggering their need for relevance. You first violate their need for safety and security, and then you trigger their need for relevance. That is how the pagan rulers do. So when you think about fake news, don't just think about, well, I told you this before, don't just think about CNN and those people. Fake news, or let me say, collective suggestive witchcraft, is how the pagan rulers of this world has run this world since the beginning. And since 100 BC, they've put it all in the service of Apollo. So all fake news are run. What I mean with fake news is all those fake news operations. Yes, you have those gossip magazines that spread rumors aren't true. I'm not talking about those. Neither am I talking about students in college that want to come with a newspaper and they make up stuff. I'm not talking about that. All fake news operations are done by Apollonists to keep the human population in the negative. Even though the human population has kind of exploded, you have Many more people, many more urban centers today, it's the same con game going on. That has not changed. I always tell you to look at the bigger picture. By making this video and going into some history, I hope I've educated you about this fake news phenomenon. It's nothing new, it's just collective suggestive witchcraft. You are suggested a bad outcome, so your need for safety and security is violated, but at the same time someone else comes and triggers your need for relevance. And many people fall for it. Well, now you know better. That's it for now, and create price and be at peace.